Branstead, for those of you who do not know me, I'm the Climate Smart Municipalities Committee here in St. James, and had the privilege of going to Germany to see some of the things that they did in Germany and back in December. That kind of got us fired up and ready to try to do some things here in St. James. So I think in order to try to keep this on time, because a couple people do have to leave right at 1, we'll start with introductions, and we'll go right from you, Steve, and on.
Any questions?
Steve Heil, St. James Public Schools.
Gary Winters, the Solar Store in Mankato.
Ralph Taylor, Novel Energy Solutions.
Kurt Blundgren, Butterfield.
Jim Baylor, South Central Electric.
Sabri Fair, Region 9 Development Commission.
Sam Sharp, Region 9 Development Commission.
And Matt Runge was not able to attend. He's the head of the electrical department in St. James, but he did send some information with me. So if you have questions that happen to follow in that area, maybe I will be able to help a little bit. I'm sure Gary and Ralph probably know most of those answers as well. They work with a lot of different communities. So let's just start with the first question, and we'll start with each panelist. It just says, why solar? Why are you interested in solar? Steve?
Well, two things. One, from the school district standpoint, we're always trying to find ways to better use taxpayer dollars that we get. And then the second one, I think it's good for the students as they go through the system to see that there's ways to kind of produce our own energy. We have some curriculum that'll go with it. And actually the students will be able to see kind of what they're doing day to day with some of the programs that we have. So it's a learning tool to the students.
Yeah, for me, I started as a DIY solar guy. I always had an interest from the time I was a kid. And 2018, solar kind of reached a point where the cost per watt was low enough to get someone like me to be interested in it and invest in it, put it on my house. And the guy I was supplied by, who helped me, became my business partner in the solar store. He's been installing since 2009. So it's a power production system with no cost inputs after you've installed it. And it's very durable, makes power for a long time. And so that's really where the benefit comes.
Well, I think solar, it's two things. It's one, you do it because it makes money for you or saves money, however you want to frame it. The second reason is being future focused. I've got 5 grandkids. As one old farmer told me, if we're going to leave a world that's decent for our grandkids, we can't keep doing things the way we currently are. And my life, for most of us in the room, we're going to be fine. I used the thing when I graduated from college, or when we got out of high school, how many of you guys and ladies ever worried about the world we're in? It was just about getting a job and getting our life. Ask any 20-year-old right now what they think about. They're scared to death. And so, like I said, we can stay in the present and be fine how we are and say, it's good. Or, like me with my 5 grandkids, I know we need to change, and that's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater saying we cut fossil fuel. But if we don't change, it doesn't look too good for them going forward. So that's our focus and why we're involved in renewable energy.
Yeah, so I farm just the western part of this county, and have known Ralph for over 20 years. We've been in leadership class. So his son was working Wall Street and was exploring the idea of solar primarily, and then looking for some maybe hog barns or something on a roof mount. So that's how I got in. So my array was installed 8 years ago, and has been a real success. Now I understand solar, I don't think is a primary solution for renewable energy, but it's part of the solution. So I'm happy I done it, and really love satisfied.
I think if you're looking at, why solar, I think you need to ask yourself, what is the reason that you're looking to do it? Is it for environmental reasons that you just want to create green energy, be part of a green energy solution? Are you doing it because you want to save on your electric bill? Those type of things I think are important to look at when you're deciding if you're going to do a system. look at what those importances are, because that'll help you decide if you're looking at what the payback is, or, the financials, how that works out. It really is, I see it steer people's decision when they're deciding to do something, whether it's solar or wind or something like that.
Yeah, so from my perspective in the world of community and economic development, I think it's a lot about just community resilience, looking at all the opportunities that solar presents for cost savings that just keeps money in our communities that we can spend on other necessary things. And then also really preparing our communities to think about the future, to make sure that we're leaders and that we're not left behind in the energy transition.
Yeah, I think a lot of great reasons have been touched on why you should pursue solar. It's an abundant resource, cost-friendly, the path forward in our transforming energy landscape, and I think it's important to have a diversified energy source as well. So, a lot of great reasons.
Very good, thank you. So what factors need to be considered before installing the solar system, other than the personal decision or the cost? Maybe you can kind of, why don't we start with you, Gary, and kind of start that way?
Well, the first thing is, for us anyway, our question to people is, how much power do you use? How much power do you need? What are your ideas behind it? Ralph mentioned the financial side. We don't install solar that isn't sold from the financial benefit side first. It's got to make sense for somebody's budget and their forward-looking value of their property. And so this is one of those things that the stretch is the capital investment on the front end. The benefit is the long-term power production on the back end. So you have to come in kind of open-eyed. You're owning your energy versus renting it. You're offsetting your grid usage because you're making power now. Now you're a producer. So you have to kind of wrap your mind around that, take a look at it, and see, okay, this is a certain amount of funds, certain size, and then look at it in your own life, in your own budget, and say, what else do I want to do and how do I want to do it, and start from there.
I think there's two sandboxes to play in with solar. There's the get your own solar and own it as a house or a business owner. It's an opportunity to, right now it's why did most of us buy a house rather than rent for life? Renting, you have a monthly payment, you don't have control of the cost, you know it's going to go up. That's why we bought a house. You can still have a higher or lower payment than you did renting an apartment, but you have control of it. When your payments are done, you own your house. We're doing the same thing with solar, but it's electricity. Right now, before solar came along, it's renting an apartment for life. Solar gives you the opportunity to own your electricity rather than rent it. As a business owner, it's one more line item that will both save you money and give you control. Same for a house owner. Now, 2/3 of the houses and buildings aren't made to put solar on. In that case, that's where our business is transformed into a community solar garden. You get to participate, and it's a virtual transaction. You get a discount off your electricity cost for zero investment and zero risk. You subscribe to the amount of electricity you use, and your electric bill, you get the credits for what's produced off-site. And you reduce your electric bill by 10 to 15%. The other great part of it that we often forget to talk about as developers is you're also doing what's right. But in the past, when you did what's right, you would have to ask, how much do I have to spend to do it? If you want to help someone homeless, what's it going to cost me to help them? We all want to do it. With solar, you get to do what's right and save money. It makes it a unique opportunity.
Yes, my own situation, my own farm, the government, I would say, partners with us with the tax incentive. Without that, it wouldn't work. So I trusted a good friend, and we're still remain friends because it's been pretty beneficial.
Most days, anyway.
It's been a real good situation now. On a roof, there's zero maintenance. I have to provide a Wi-Fi signal so they can track the power, and then it's all central. We've got a net meter, so what I'm not using gets put on the grid, and they're paying me back for what I'm not using. So it's been a net effect, real victory for my operation. So I estimated between 8 and 9 years it would pay for it. Based on utility costs then, it's been quicker than that because rates have gone up, so it's a win-win.
You're on hog barns, what's your roof slope?
No, I have it on a machine shed back when I referenced hog barns.
So you
It's like a
build
cliff.
it to a 612,
I have a 412 pitch.
It really doesn't matter a lot. There's
you don't lose
small.
much.
712 I think is ideal for the sun angle.
Mhm.
Snow does stick on them more than I anticipated, but you don't go up there and scrape them off. Just stand on the ground and look at them. So I had 1 month this year, in 8 years it's been up, that it was snow covered. It's most efficient when the air is cool, the air temperature is cool, and the sun is bright. But we have so much more sun in June. So accumulated, that's your biggest income.
Thank you.
Jim, anything to add to that?
Well, I just say, and it's sort of already been said, you know, what you're doing is you're paying for electricity, you're either paying it up front with the solar array, or you're paying it, you know, if you're paying your bill, you know, it's already been said, you're paying it every month. So it's not free, you know, you can pay that off, but it's still, you're paying for that electricity. So you just sort of look, you know, balance out, you know, what your future is. You know, if you're gonna be in your home for a long period of time, for instance, it'd be more beneficial than if you plan on selling it in 3 years, you know, type of thing. So just sort of look at it, you know, I say you can look at it as paying for electricity up front instead of paying for electricity over time, like they had already sort of mentioned.
Yeah, Ralph kind of answered this next part. I was going to say, are there situations where solar is not a good option? And obviously, depending upon, I suppose, trees and angle and all of that sort of thing.
I'll add to that.
Okay.
When we go to a site, and I'm sure Ralph does this too, you can't always locate solar perfectly. Two things. We will run multiple options and give the property owner an idea, okay, if we do put it on the roof, a lot less cost than putting it on the ground, here's the difference in production. In any scenario in Minnesota, you're gonna make 90% of your solar power generally between the equinoxes. You have, in southern Minnesota, 105 to 110 sun days in that time frame. You do have a lot of seasonal cloud cover in November, December, January, February. You already factor that in. In other words, and I'm sure Ralph does this too, you never overpromise what the production is gonna be. You work from that energy generation and the value of it. You provide an assumption of potentially what kind of inflation for energy will be over time, and that will kind of give you an idea of what the value generation will be over time. For me, I put solar on my house. I'm in a shaded area in Mankato, east facing 412 pitch. Okay, my system still, I put it on, so I didn't pay a professional installer to do it. So already planned on about a 9.5 to 10 year payback. I'm on XL, which it does have an incentive. But it's paid back in almost half that time because of the grid cost increasing in the city of Mankato since 2018. So what I'm doing in my house is basically flattening the cost curve on energy.
What's your cost per kilowatt there?
When you add in fuel and sales tax, it's approaching 15 cents on average annually. Yeah.
And I think to clarify, the ideal roof is south-facing, no shade.
Yep.
When it's shaded, and we provide, like Kurt mentioned, you can see production in real time. You don't need it. Your meter measures what goes in, but people like to see that. But a cloud goes over, it affects production. But the National Renewable Energy Lab is based with the United States government, the Department of Defense, based on location, slope. We can give you a production estimate for every month. It's a bell curve. The average summer is about twice what the average is, winter's half. As he mentioned, short days, I mean, what time is it dark out?
Yeah.
In the winter, 5 o'clock. What time's the sun come up? 8 or 9. And the sun's way lower. Summertime like now, it's light at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and we get in at 10:30 because it's light out yet. You know, that's and so solar panels just reflect that. If you put them on the east side of your house, doesn't mean solar's not good, it's all it costs, but when the sun, when it crosses noon and goes to the west side,
You're making
Hey.
less.
the sun's not hitting the panels. It's pretty simple math, great for school kids. You know, it's a hell of a math project of why do we like south? Because it hits all day. But for some businesses, with the peak demand being 5 o'clock, if they get the right angle on their building and get an hour at night and they're getting hit with the huge demand charge, there's a lot more value, not as good as south, but the west facing is still pretty strong because they gain another hour, hour and a half, the south side. So it's all about location, but if your house doesn't fit solar, that's where community projects are. It's a virtual transaction and you can still do your part to help reduce climate change. I mean, there is always a way to utilize renewable energy. It just may not be 100% in that location on that building, but it will be some factor of 100.
Very good. Any other additional comments to that?
Well, from like a school standpoint, ours are all flat roofs, right, or slightly sloped, but we had to worry about how many different units and other stuff are up on the roof, and then we had to factor in snow load on those roofs too. So there were certain roofs on the school that would have been ideal, but like the spans over the gymnasiums with the snowpack didn't allow us to use certain areas. So it took for us, it took a lot of, they had to send a bunch of engineers out and double check.
So you didn't consider standalone, building the athletic fields?
No, they won't. The companies that we worked with, they won't touch us out in the fields because they're too afraid there's gonna be too many walls or kids running around and climbing up, so they only wanna go on the roofs and schools.
Soccer field, soccer ball, so. No.
Actually, for that, the panels are warranted to take a 1-inch steel ball at 50 miles per hour. California fire codes, A or B, I mean, you can go out and bang on them and they'll take a hell of a direct hit there for hail and everything.
That's a hammer hit. That's, you could hit it with a hammer
Yeah.
and it would not break.
And I don't want to say it's something you can do, but that's tier ones, that is a warranty they have to do. But they don't take twisting well. I mean, you know, and if you think they aren't very thick, it's polycarbonate, sand, and wires. So you take a direct hit, that polycarbonate takes a lot. For hailstorms, there's panels on your roof, you won't be replacing the panels or the roof near as likely as you'll have to replace the roof and the dents and dings. And 10 years in it, we've got lots of examples where people have called their north side of the roof is getting replaced, the panels are up. They may lose a panel here or a panel there, but the more you learn about solar, the less risk you see and the less consternation there is. It's, I kind of use it, it's kind of like religion. If you've never met a Muslim person, you don't know about it, you hear all the news. You meet somebody that's Muslim, it's like, they aren't a whole lot different than us. The crazies are crazy, it doesn't matter where they're at, but the more you know, the less fear there is. And it's that way with just about everything in life. And that's probably our biggest hindrance now is ignorance as to what solar really does, misrepresentation of some of the facts, and like I said, it's not other installers that are competition, it's people just not knowing the truth about them, right?
Yeah, you have to remember too, that steel ball is hitting it at a 90-degree angle, right? And most of your panels are at some level of tilt, so you're going to be deflecting. The only time we've ever had a claim, we have over 300 systems in the field all the way down as far south as Texas, and they get a lot more and a lot bigger hail than we do up here, more often anyway. And we do have a couple of farmers that had an open deck mower, went across their gravel road. We had a ground mount, shot a rock out, it stars because it's tempered glass just like your windshield on your car.
And it's a sharper point. A rock is a hell of a lot different than a hail ball.
The panel was starred. The panel was not compromised. It was still making power fine, but the glass was starred. Eventually moisture will get in there. And, you know, the nice thing about Tier 1 panels too, we called our supplier and they replaced it under warranty, even though it was the guy's fault. So they're generally very good to work with when you're working with top-level panels.
Yeah, the first place I got into solar was out in Arizona when I was out there. And we did covered parking. So that's big. So I brought that up here because I thought, hey, everybody liked covered parking. Their problem is they gotta put it up high enough to let all your plows get underneath it. And then they don't want the plow hitting the poles. Right? I mean, so
That's the biggest, yeah, put in a $200,000 system and you hit that pole, it's, hitting the pole's not the problem, it's that twisting and now everything's bent. Then you gotta, it's not just a pole or a dented plow, you got a $50,000.
Tim Henny told us they did that at Winona State, right?
Yeah, Winona State did it on a parking lot, I don't know how long ago.
And there's some Red Wing, there's some all over, but
It's,
you gotta tweak.
you got,
It's,
3 more yards.
has nothing to do with solar, it's our environment that goes with that.
sure.
We had, I mean, our parking lot, say there were schools with 3,500 kids, right? So your parking lot is football field's big, so you can get a lot of solar panels in those areas.
So a question I have here, I don't understand electricity. The switch, I understand that. At kilowatts, it's beyond me. But the numbers I understand. Now, if my bill is $300 a month, that's $3,600 a year. Times 10 years, that's $36,000. That's how much I would spend in 10 years on electricity. And a 7, 8, 10 year, I'm gonna use a 10-year payback. I would be investing $36,000 plus more, and the extra would be paid off by tax credits, tax savings I would have. So to create enough power to basically pay my electricity off, how much would I really be putting up front? Would it be about twice that number, 72,000 or?
When we started, we were doing on businesses and homes. One, it's finance rate. What one has to remember is, when you put solar on, you're spending all that money now. You're spending, it's going to the government taxes, and that's 60% of the cost of the array if you're a business. You get 30% investment tax credit, dollar for dollar off your federal taxes, and about 30% value cash depreciation. That remaining 40% is paid, you are currently giving to the utility to rent your electricity. So you're already spending all that money. And when we do it, you can find financing, so when you put in a solar array, there's two things you do. You balance it to your use, and you balance it to your tax appetite. If you maximize them, you have $0 of investment. From a banker's standpoint, I think we have a couple here, it's one of the safest risk profiles you can get. You check, if you put in solar, when people do it, if they don't make their payment, all they do is their costs go up. They're going to pay back to where they are electricity. It's one of the lowest default rates of any loan out there. So if I get 100% financing, instead of paying, let's say it's a $100,000 system for easy math, I've got a $60,000 tax credit. That can all be used in year one, that investment, or I can carry it forward 20 years.
That tax credit can carry forward.
Oh, yeah. That 30% of 100,000, 30% is tax credit. There's a 1-year clawback on that. So it's one of the few things you can get money for last year's taxes that is gone under any other circumstance that I'm aware of. So if you paid $20,000 in taxes, federal taxes last year, you can get that back if you put solar in this year. Plus you would still have another $10,000 of credit. On that $100,000, it's 30%. If you're a business, you have a 5-year maker's depreciation. It equates to about 30% cash value. That is eligible for Section 179, so you can claim it all this year if you want, or you can carry that forward as long as you want. And that you have to be paying taxes in order, you don't get the, so businesses understand that. If you're just putting it on your house, you have a higher electricity cost, but you can't claim depreciation on that. The tax credits go to the owner of the rent. If you want to put solar on your house, you can have an ownership, or Uncle Bob or whoever, someone else, you can have third-party ownership that can get all the tax credits. The credit for the electricity goes to where the meter is. So instead of paying your utility 8 cents or 12 cents or 15 cents, you're paying your loan off to the bank. So our thing to pay back, you get your loan zeroed out in 8 years, there is no payback because you haven't invested any money. You were spending everything, you're just changing where it's going.
Shifting the pockets.
Because you valued your property up by what that is that you paid for and got your
Oh,
money back.
absolutely.
It-
And it adds the value to a house. You put it on a house and it's like, you know, when we first started 10 years ago, we had to fight, well, what if it reduces my property value? It's like, well, that's been making $100 of electricity a month. We can take it off and we'll put it up somewhere else. Or I can leave it on that house for you and it will produce electricity for 40 years.
What prospective homeowner wanting to buy a house doesn't look at the utilities in the last year?
Right, there's a
And they
disclosure.
see that, wait a minute, what do you mean electricity's free? Well, those things on your roof do that, all of that.
Right, it's a game changer.
So telling
And
you it doesn't have value.
And they're warranted to be at 85% of their production in year 25. When Cliff was at Wall Street, they quit modeling them at 40 years. I mean, they will still be producing 50% or above in 40 years. It's a once-in-a-life investment if you're offsetting your electricity use. And that's why it's for the banks, and once they get into solar, start lending, they'll take all those loans they can. Who's gonna give that up? If you quit paying it, now your electric bill went up. You cost yourself money. Why would you? There's lots of other things they won't pay for that don't impact them.
The other thing you want to remember too, you're assuming that you're going to always have a $300 a month utility payment and that the cost of that grid power never goes up. The utility company is still a business. It still has both capital costs, the grid costs, the transmission, all of that, and then you have not only the energy generation, but the fuel costs to generate that energy. So what we saw at the beginning of the Ukraine war was, you know, big spikes in energy inputs that power plants. Your electricity part of your bill basically is there. It's contracted, it's base level power, but the utility companies have the fuel cost adjustment in there for just such an event where, okay, our cost of energy generation fuels go up because of the markets, or some other factor, and we have that variable in there. It doesn't mean it's always going to be positive on a monthly basis. Sometimes it's not. But I can tell you, my fuel cost last year at times was 5 cents a kilowatt hour just for the fuel cost. That doesn't include the electricity or the sales tax that's included in there. And you have the other side, which is your meter charge, your facilities charge, the static costs that you have to pay. All of those, you know, utility company is a business too. They have to be able to cover all of their expenses, and their expenses go up over time.
You had brought up to size it to the amount of electricity you use. What if you oversized it? What, is there value to oversizing and just selling your excess?
That's where the net metering law in Minnesota is a good one. It basically states that if you're within a given amount of production, if you're a small producer, then you're gonna get paid or credited a value of the average cost of electricity within your local utility. Okay, that is not that way in most other states.
So we are actually fortunate
Yes.
if we overproduce.
When we go to South Dakota, they take your energy and say thank you. So what we have to do there is we don't let any solar go out onto the grid. We basically, they'll use it at their property, and then they will send it to batteries, and then basically what we call a self-consumption system. And in those systems, you do want to actually angle your solar to maximize your battery charging. So it's a different strategy. You can still get a pretty good payback. Batteries become more of a cost avoidance, if you will, than a value generator, which is what the net meter program in Minnesota is.
You know, in talking to Matt Runge, our utility person in St. James, he said from the consumer standpoint, you want to go net metering. He said it doesn't benefit the city a whole lot. So he says, I'm looking at, as a consumer, this is what you should do. But he said, you know, for me as the utility provider, it isn't to our best interest, but it's best interest to you, the consumer. Would you agree,
Yeah,
Jim?
so like for net metering, basically if we're like, if you're part of a cooperative or on the municipal, it has to be less than 40 kW AC rated the solar panel to qualify for net
About
metering.
$500 a month.
So that's what it has to be to qualify for that net metering. And then the way that net metering works then is there's that, when you put up a solar array, there's a back and forth of electricity that goes through the meter. Right now some clouds moved in, so maybe now your home is using more than you were generating, and so now electricity is flowing from the utility into your home. Clouds move away, sun comes up, now maybe you're producing more, the meter's going backwards. It's not really going backwards, but it's giving you kilowatt hours going the other way. And what happens is over the course of that month, there's all this back and forth of electricity. You know, at night, obviously you're buying power. So what happens is you're going to get a bill from the utility for the stuff that you purchased, so it was delivered to you, and then you're going to get either a credit or a check. What happens is the person, when you're doing the contract, when you're doing your interconnection contract, you check the box and say, I want to receive, you know, a check, or I want to receive credits. So basically, usually the credit is like a dollar value credit. So on your bill, you may be paying some, and then you may be receiving a dollar value credit for that solar that you sent back to the grid. And then as far as like the beneficial part to the person putting in the solar, that rate is at the average retail rate. So every year the utility calculates that rate, what that rate is going to be based on the person's rate class. And it's at the average retail rate, so not the wholesale rate, the retail rate, what we sell for. That's where it's not good for utility, because the most expensive power that we buy is what the solar produces. But that, when you talked about the batteries, because that was sort of one of the questions, what are the benefits with the batteries? If you're like on a net metering system like that, the utility is your free battery. You don't have to purchase batteries to do that, and that's sort of where the net metering law comes into
That's
effect.
if you're under 40 kilowatt.
It has to be under 40 kW, not 40, it has to be less than 40.
Well,
kW, yeah.
The investor-owned utilities, it's up to 1 megawatt or 120% of your use. And actually, that's probably the most fair way. With the rural co-ops, net metering is at 40 kilowatts. So that's about $500 a month at a dime per kilowatt hour. You know, you adjusted that value. The problem with the current rule on that is now for most businesses, when they put that in, $500 a month used to be a lot of electricity. It's really not anymore. So now what happens from the developer and the consumer side of, I'm using 80 kilowatts, I don't get net metering on that. What happens is during the day when it's the sun out, I'm producing electricity, and kind of from the developer and consumer standpoint, excess, it's going to go into the grid. The utilities have a monopoly. Until solar came in, you didn't have any other choice. So now any extra production without net metering, they buy at their lowest avoided retail rate, which is 2 to 3 cents. But when would we be putting that electricity on the grid? During the heat of the day, right? When it's in demand. And we're also from the utility side, or the developer, we're saying, hey, we're cutting down, you're getting that put in for free at a time when you can't pre-buy everything. It's expensive to buy it. You have to pay a premium for any excess during peak demand times. So assuming if the sun's bright and it's out really hard, utilities buying more. When people get home at 5 o'clock, it's another boost on it. What net metering says is, hey, whatever we produce extra that goes in there, you get it back at night at the same price. Otherwise, without net metering, we produce it in the day, you get 2 cents, and at night you get to buy it back for 12. So there is some, now the utilities do have a point when it's less than 40 kilowatts up to that, you get that avoided retail rate. Well, most houses only use 7 to 10 kilowatts. Well, now if they put in a 40 kilowatt array, they get that retail rate. We kind of agree that's not good, but the thing is, that's the number of places that are below 40, putting in a 40 kilowatt is probably less than 5 that you would have in there, I would guess. The number of clients that are over $500 that want to add solar, but can't go at 100% of the use because they're going to get paid that 2 or 3 cents, is a significant portion of their business. And that's kind of that is a conflict between people wanting to increase renewable energy and the utilities saying, I want to protect my kilowatt hours. Our comeback to them is, our co-ops were meant to provide their customers with the cheapest, most reliable set of electricity possible, not protect the kilowatt hours and your co-op business. In Germany, they call it the solar death spiral. The co-ops that got aggressive and enhanced solar and figured out how to work with them are growing. The ones that said, we're going to limit it and raise rates and not have it, big companies started putting in batteries and just left them, and now they lost all the business. Now your small ones that are the highest service are left, and it was like a stranglehold. So finding that point of compromise and cooperation, I think, is essential, and you see it with our rural co-ops now. They used to be local. Well, now they're serving, we're My Energy, it's serving. They aren't a local co-op anymore. They're a co-op utility, but hell, they're 3 states and covering, I don't know, what are they, probably 30 counties, I would guess. That's there isn't a whole lot of difference, and the investor-owned utilities are regulated by the PUC that regulate rates, and because they're a monopoly. They don't have competition. You can't go in and say, I don't like my utility, I'm going to find another one. It's like, nope, you can't, and for good reason. We need to have, because if there were 20 utilities coming in, it'd be a quagmire.
Do you think the new bill that was passed by the Minnesota legislature will help working with some of the utilities that have been less involved in this sort of thing? In other words, what I'm hearing, Xcel has been very aggressive in their solar. We're Great River and Missouri River here, and they've been less aggressive. Are you noticing anything like that?
It's just passed. It will be good. The goals to be carbon-free by 2040 were a plus. The initial push on the investor-owned utilities, which cover a much bigger portion of the electricity from volume, that was put in by the initial legislation to get to 25% renewable energy. It will be a plus. I believe the aggressive utilities are going to look, versus 10 years ago. 10 years ago, people weren't sure if we needed solar or not. It's too expensive. I've heard horror stories about it. And hell, I've never seen a solar array. I don't know what they are. Now you go to the solar meetings like, what are we going to do in solar board? And there is the consumer pressure to get involved and be more proactive is probably the biggest impact. Now there's support for it. Solar on schools, it's a game changer for a school putting it up. It gives them more free cash for the general fund. Someone will own it and put it up there. We'll put it on schools and own it and give them a discounted rate. 10 years they can get it there. You can do flips. It will keep a lot of our small schools and some of the ones struggling, it'll give them some freedom that they can count on for 40 years. And the value now, I'm a farmer. Land's never penciled to buy it the day you buy it for agriculture. I mean, our farm's 142 years. When it was bought, that was gonna go broke. My great-grandpa was gonna go broke. He paid, 125 bucks an acre. It just doesn't make it. We're 6 generations and fortunate enough we bought some land, but I bought our farm 30 years ago at 1,000 bucks an acre and struggled like mad figuring out how to pay for it. My son just bought it from us and it's at 6,000. Probably could have got 8,000 out of it. And so when you look at some of this, solar's an investment that way too. What's it cost now? Yeah, 8 years to pay back with the 3% rate increase, but if it runs better, but it'll be, instead of offsetting 8-cent electricity in 30 years, if you look at the current trends, it's going to be offsetting 25-cent electricity, and you haven't had to pay for that increase from 12 cents to 25. You pocketed that.
I guess I would answer your question too about the legislation, is that there is specific language in there in terms of how much of both a municipal and a co-op utility's energy needs to come from solar, and then also how much there's 1% of their energy generation will have to come from installations smaller than 40 kilowatts. So there is specific language in there that will really encourage them to work with their community members and their businesses about installing solar to meet some of those quotas. So
We do a lot of rural business and farm installations, smaller ones. There is a USDA grants program for, it's called the Rural Energy for America program. And for qualifying systems, it will pay 50% of the project cost. So when you add those other tax incentives in there, now your cost turnaround payback is a lot shorter than what he's talking about. And if you look at the language of the grants program, it's not just for solar. I wrote it down because I couldn't remember everything. Biomass, geothermal, hydro, hydrogen, wind, and ocean. And the grants program is also available for efficiency upgrades. So I always tell people, whether it's a home or a business, if you can do this, you get a better payback by using less power to begin with. So you want to do efficient. I put a heat pump hot water heater in my house. It uses 1/10 of the power annually. I use 40 kilowatts, 40 kilowatt hours a month to heat my water, and that's 7 solar panels worth of production right there. So that I saved. So yeah, the combination of efficiency upgrades and add power production, and now all of a sudden you have an accelerating factor for your payback.
What's the name of the business, Gary?
I own the solar store in
The
Mankato.
solar store. Okay.
What he's talking about is the USDA REAP grant. So
Yes.
if you just want to look it up, USDA REAP grant.
I can email
there is
you.
limited funds and it changes the amount available by year and everything.
You
So
have to,
it's not apply and get it by no means.
No.
You want to have
Right.
that.
you'll have to get a grant writer, you have to submit an application through the USDA.
Yep.
And then you may or may not get funding. It may be 5-6 months before you find out if you get funding. You can't start the work before you do the application there, so if it is something you're gonna look at, make sure you look at all the stipulations and everything before you do it. And there's gonna be some upfront costs, because like I said, you may wanna have a grant writer, you're probably gonna need an energy audit or an assessment to go with it for the cost savings, to show what the cost savings is gonna be, or what the energy, at least what the energy reduction is gonna be, for whatever it is that you're doing. We've had farmers that have done for grain dryers, we haven't done it for wind turbines. We actually did one at South Central Electric, I did a REAP grant for changing our lighting, our yard lighting from old light to LEDs. So there's different energy efficiency things that you can look at for doing that. as far
And
as
do-
the businesses.
Small towns like St. James within the city qualify for that USDA, or is that just out rural?
I'm not, there's different, I think there used to be 3 different levels. There's 80,000 and less, I think 80 to 200,000 and 200,000 and more. Different pools of funds, different money by state. If you're in the southern states, they've got so much money in it that, basically every application gets it. Minnesota bounces all over the board. when the money gets in, and I think it's replenished a couple times, you might know that stuff too, Kurt. I don't know if you had it from the farm service.
Not from the FSA.
It's,
It's
it varies,
USDA.
they can take a look at it, because I can't remember if municipals can apply or not.
It's just for businesses.
But it's, yeah,
Yeah.
mostly that's like, it's been farms that have
Yeah.
seen, you know, farm is a business. Yeah, so individuals cannot do it, yeah.
Could governmental agencies like county services or city services?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
There's a grant writer that we use, and if people are interested, we tell them, you know, call them up. We'll give you an estimate of what possibly you're thinking of in solar, and then he can ask you, as a property owner, very targeted questions based on the grant application, because all it is a point system that they rate you on, and then they compare that versus other grants that are being applied for. And he can tell you if you applied, what your chances would be. You know, he won't guarantee anything, but we always try and be upfront with people that way. And they have expanded the amount of money in those grants, and now they pay them quarterly instead of biennially. So there is a greater pool of funds.
Yeah, it's a competitive process, so it
It
goes
is.
by the score.
Yep.
Yeah, I wouldn't qualify as an individual. I
No,
wouldn't
not for a
qualify.
REAP grant.
Okay. How big, a 40 kilowatt, is that one array, is that several arrays? What's the size?
I'll let those guys talk about that, but it depends on the size of, so what it is for panels. So how many watts each panel is, so how
Right,
much
no,
coverage
that's
you're
not my
gonna need.
language, so.
They're more efficient now, but
They're way more efficient.
I have a 50 by 80 machine shed that with a southern
Okay.
exposed roof. That's an 18 and a half kW.
Oh, there's a lot,
So that's
so
be
it's
half
big.
40, you know.
Okay.
So,
Basically, and, you know, when we started, we were putting in 285 or 300 watt panels. You know, we're now at 440, so the area will be decreased. On a flat roof, don't hold me to exact numbers, and there's a little tweaking, but roughly your 500 square feet would be 40 kilowatts now with that. If you're putting it on the ground, you're looking at about, you know, 220-ish feet probably for a 40 kilowatt array, and you can split that up into basically, you know, 1, 2, or 3 rows. But when it was smaller wattage, I had more than, you know, just 300 feet. But like I said, I think we're gonna be closer to 200 now for a 40 kilowatt array.
And something like that produces how many dollars worth of electricity then?
And a 40
That's-
kilowatt array AC, 50 kilowatts DC direct current,
Okay.
because utilities talk AC, developers for the most part are DC. As a farmer, kilowatts are the acres, kilowatt hours are the bushels. So you pay kilowatt hours, we build in kilowatts. A 10 kilowatt array will produce about 12,500 kilowatt hours. At a dime, that's $1,250 of revenue, of cost, or electricity, or $100 a month. The average house is about $75 a month in electricity, probably 85 now because of time and increase. That's gonna be a, you know, 7 to 10 kilowatt array will offset most houses.
Are you finding more interest in downtown businesses, in the buildings, or is most of the work with residential and farm systems?
For us, we're building mostly community solar gardens now, so we face the rural areas, the farms are all looking at it, you know, good crop prices the last few years. It's just, like I said, one more line item you can control. You know, it used to be a quarter acre would put up 40 kilowatts. As we talked, at a dime, that's $6,000. That's the most productive ground you've got. So it's, yeah, we're the best stewards of the land, the longest stewards of the land, but we're putting that in to save money and make our land more productive. For the businesses, when you get downtown, the biggest thing is so much shading. Most of the ownership, well, we're renting everything, and a big building, I got 25 different people in here, that's gonna cover just a little bit, and so it depends. Warehouses, and if they're built where the roof will handle it, they're putting them on a lot of the roofs. They just don't know, even though we're only 5 pounds per square foot, solar panels won't crash a roof down. I mean, adding that on, if it was gonna come down, it was anyway, but last person on the roof gets the blame.
So,
Doesn't matter, that's why you have a structural
Snow
engineer.
brings
but-
roofs down
That's right.
wrong, so don't blame it on the panel.
Well, but you were up there last and it stood for 25 years. Yeah, but we haven't had 4 feet of snow on the roof, and, you know, and it does shift it a little bit, but yeah.
I guess I would direct that question to Gary. Weren't you working with somebody in Hutchinson last year?
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk about that and maybe?
Yeah, it's a guy that has multiple businesses. He has I think 11 light industrial metal post frame buildings with various versions of different businesses in there. And he covered all the buildings with solar. And of course, we had structural engineer, we had the city out there. You don't get anything permitted that is not allowed within the framework of engineering. So, but his mind was, he already has solar on his house and another property is totally in on it. And he, you know, he wanted to put solar on there. It's totally wide open area in Hutch, and covered all those roofs. And then he put a sub-meter in for each business and incentivized them, their usage based on, you know, he kind of became their own utility. Even he had the interconnection agreement with the city, okay? But then he used that to his advantage as a business owner, and you know, that power is getting used by welding operations and auto operations in the middle of the day when everyone else is there, air conditioning on and schools are in and all that. So it's diverting a lot of the energy production that would have been asked for by this, you know, from them by the city. Now they're making it right on those buildings. But he would have been willing to pay for the roof reinforcement. He was ready to include that if he needed to.
One question here, you know, some of our downtown business owners, our rate for downtown business is 9.2 cents. Does it still make sense to look at solar?
I always look at, this is just us, I like to look at the bill and dissect it. I know that you're getting a lot, or your base level power from hydro, which is probably the single most consistent power source. It doesn't have these huge changes. I guess my question would be if there's any fuel cost adjustments ever put in there, if that is a straight 9.2 cents plus sales tax. This is where it would be worth it to look at 12 months of bills and see if that varies. Okay, because that fuel cost adjustment is in there not only for power production, but if for whatever reason you have a lot of peak energy need by the city and they have to import some peak power to cover their base load in high demand times.
Sure.
And if that's the case, then you are, you know, you're using that solar as a business in the middle part of the day. That's benefiting you and also the community because it reduces grid demand overall. As far as the level cost there, it's still going to go up over time. It won't go up to the same degree as maybe other utilities, and that you have to weigh. You know, how long am I going to own the building, and what is the value of power in 10 years versus now? And we're all just making estimations at that point.
You know, that's one of the naysayers say, well, all this stuff is gonna cost and it's gonna raise our rates. Well, our rates are gonna raise regardless, I'd say, you know. What is your comeback to that when they say those kinds of comments?
Well, I'll always fall back on what Ralph said before, and that is you're already paying for the energy to begin with.
Yeah.
As a consumer. And there is base load out there, but then there are times where it gets super hot or for whatever reason, everybody asks for more power. Okay? In other parts of the country, they're using different values of rate depending on the time of day.
Sure.
We call it time of use. And in that scenario, they're charging the most in the middle of the day when everyone's using the power.
Yeah.
If you have a business or a property that is making its own power, that's one less bit of kilowatt hours you're asking from the grid. And if you make a little bit extra, electricity goes to its nearest load, so it goes out your place and right there to your next door neighbor. It's most efficient when it's used right where it's made.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of retorts to that. That's usually my starting point, yeah.
I would just say solar's disruptive to our utility model is a 50-year-old model, and it served us well, but you look at any other business when you have a monopoly, what's gonna happen if Uber buys out Lyft? Why don't they want that? Of course, it's gonna get more efficient for Uber and everything, but what's cost going to do? We all know. So, solar, when it's done right, doesn't raise costs. The utilities on our cost plus. As a farmer, I know if we were cost plus, corn would cost 11, 12 bucks a bushel. Why would I ever get more efficient? If I'm making 10% on $10, that's a buck. If I get more efficient, now I only have $9. If I get 10% more efficient, I got $9 of income, I only make 90 cents. There isn't an incentive for the owners to get more. That's why there's regulation on that. So it's the same thing we heard in agriculture. Horses farmed all our ground for 100 years, and it did really well. When tractors came in, by God, you don't need tractors. They're expensive and it's going to wreck the horse market. And that's what we're fighting with now.
Ralph, I have a question. I apologize to the group if you all know this, but you've talked about solar gardens in a community. Is that something that is private investors make that happen, or does a city make it happen, or is it both, or are there other ways that happens?
It can be all of the above. The one in, right now, Xcel Energy is the only one really participating in community solar gardens. There's some small ones that My Energy, I guess, has a couple. They're 40 kilowatts or whatever. I mean, they're 40 or 50. It's $500 a month. It doesn't even register. With Xcel, we're limited at 1 megawatt per garden. It's private ownership of it, but most of them end up being owned by like retirement funds because they got a 25-year income, it's stable, they know what it is, it's a good off-taker. So it's a blend of different things. The one in Butterfield, where there's a little blurb that's Xcel, you go outside the city, we couldn't build because one field was split with REA and Xcel, and we couldn't go across that imaginary line. That is privately owned, and it's the residents of Butterfield that are subscribers to it.
So if there were people in St. James who wanted to do that, and would we first go to our utility, to Missouri River, and say, we'd like to do this, how do we do it? Or?
That would, I mean,
I don't even
in
know.
Minnesota right now, there is no, for the REAs or the rural electric co-ops, there is no mandate for them to do it. Like I said, some have done small ones, but yeah, that would be, you go to the utility and it'd be the best to answer that.
We have one. We have a community solar garden, and basically it'd be up to the utility. So you'd have to convince the city of St. James to want to put one up. Is the way that
So
you
you
have to
can't
do
do
it.
it without them?
No, you can't do it without them. Yeah, no.
Well, and
Because
St. James,
they'd be the ones, and probably Missouri River too, their power supplier would be involved, but it would be up to the city to do one
Okay.
in the city limits.
Gustavus Adolphus wanted to put up an 800 kilowatt array. St. Peter Utility went and said that would make them a utility if they did that. And their provider, I believe, is a Great River, that would be, St. Peter blocked it. They cannot build
competition.
They cannot build an array on their own ground for their own use because of the interpretation, if they're still hooked up, that they would be a utility.
There are 2 huge full solar fields in St. Peter, around St. Peter, are there not?
And that depends on where Xcel Energy is, but with this one where it's
They're both
within
across
the city,
river.
and that's, so even if St. James said you will get in a they have to get from their supplier that they will allow them to do it, because a lot of the utilities sign exclusive agreements with with their power supplier. There's one in Northern signed a 75-year exclusive provider agreement with them in 2015.
Ours is 50 years, so.
That wasn't to open up competition and get more efficient. That was to block competition from occurring. I mean, that was not consumer focused.
It's working so far for just 8 cents a kilowatt, obviously.
Yeah, we're 8.2 for residential, which is very cheap, obviously you know that.
But is this what Gary Richter's probably pursuing for Comfrey?
Well,
Solar garden?
they're wanting to do a solar garden in the city of Comfrey. And of course, that would be through the Brown County Rural Electric, which then they have to, I think Great River is their provider. So they have to work through all those channels to see if they would approve them to do it. So, any other quick questions? It is 1 o'clock. I appreciate
Thank you.
all of you members for coming. I thank you for, this was a lot of good, valuable information.
Just to let you know, we'll send a follow-up email to everybody who was here and share the emails of the people who were here. So if you have questions particularly for them, you can contact them directly.
Matt Runge did send me some information here in regard to if you go out to the city, new city hall, you can get an application and fill it out. And if you want to do solar on your roof in town, they are not going to prevent you from doing it.
That's generous.
Good to know.
It's actually a very easy process to go through the application process.
Yes.
And your solar installer will work, basically does all the heavy lifting, whoever you're contracting.
Especially when the state of Minnesota says the city damn well better not.
No, it's as far as like with the utility application and process, it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Luther College, where my sister taught her.
After last night's meeting, we kind of thought there'd be more people here and said, yeah, we're coming, but you know, how it goes sometimes. So, thank you for our panelists that are coming. Like, Gary Winters in the center here was here this afternoon for the other panel. So he's and so was Jim Haler was here as well. And so, but anyway, Jim, why don't we just start on your end? You can introduce yourself, who you represent, and just a little information about that.
Jim Haler, South Central Electric, I'm the member services manager there, so I deal with, as part of my job, with all of our renewable energy, any interconnection, so any of the solar, wind, any of that type of stuff all goes through me.
Matt Runge, I'm with the City of St. James Electric Department. I basically deal with, well, keeping the lights on, and I mean, that's my first job as a lineman. Second job is kind of doing this stuff, so bear with me.
I'm Carissa Lick. I am a teacher in town, and my husband and I put up solar panels on our house in 2021.
First in town, correct?
First in town, I think.
Good for you.
Yep.
I'm
Pioneer.
I'm Gary Winters, owner of the Solar Store. It's a brick and mortar location for DIY solar and batteries, and then we're also installers.
Sam Sharp, the Region 9 Development Commission, Energy and Sustainability Planner, helping out with energy projects. And I also put solar on my house back in December, October, something like that.
Hello everybody, Sabri Fair, Associate Planner at Region 9, and we put solar at our farm in 2017, but have since sold it, so somebody else has it now.
So we have a series of questions, and this afternoon's one, I didn't have to ask many of the questions. People had questions, and the same questions that people had were kind of on my form, and we just had a great discussion about all the different things that involve solar. But I started out by saying, why solar? So anybody on the panel want to jump in there and say, why solar? Carissa, maybe, why don't you start, and then we'll go down the line.
So basically, electricity is something we need to use in our lives, and we wanted to do something to not be dependent on fossil fuels for our electricity, and since we have a roof already and it gets sunlight, we wanted to make use of that, get solar panels. Like a wind turbine would not be feasible in our property, so in terms of what we could do renewably with solar panels. And we found out, once we looked into it, that they are actually a lot more affordable than I had thought they were. You know, the prices have gone down so much. So we looked into it and we're like, oh, we can actually make this work, so we did.
Matt, why solar?
Well, I think it's kind of the future. I know that, like, while I was talking last night, I know that like a lot of even small items like street lighting stuff is going to be coming in the future, and they're going to be using it as more of like a, you know, kind of like it comes on and off as you drive by, more of almost a motion light, and then be able to set them up as security lights as well. So for me, from the city side, I obviously have decent generation as well, but I just think it's a nice source to use.
Jim, same?
I'll stick with what I said earlier today. You know, I think people need to ask themselves about, you know, why that they're interested in it. Because I see normally, you know, a couple of reasons. They're doing it because they care about the environment, and so they're looking at that, you know, option, and then, you know, to do that, or they're looking at it because they want to save money on their electric bill. So there is, and when you're looking at it, what you decide to do really does vary on what your motivation is. You know, it really does depend, because maybe the numbers don't work out, but you want to do it because you want to, you know, have a, you know, do your part to make a green energy. And so they say, I'm not as concerned about the numbers, I want to do this. Or I'm concerned about the numbers, and people, sometimes it works out and then sometimes it doesn't. So normally I tell people to ask themselves what the reason, get down to the reason that they want to do it, and then look at it from there, and then they'll find that path that they want to take.
Sure. Gary?
I'll go ahead and input my personal experience. I started out as a DIY guy. Since science class in 7th grade, I was interested in photovoltaic technology and learned about Bell Laboratories and everything with that. My home is in an old part of town in Mankato, surrounded by trees, east facing 412 pitch roof. Terrible for solar, but I was going to put it on anyway because I knew a couple of things. One, just like Carissa said, we need power, all of us do, since the dawn of time. When you put solar out there, wherever it is, it's going to make a certain amount of power based on light intensity, angle, and other things, with basically no other cost inputs once it's installed, assuming that it's installed properly. So you're buying a block of power over a given period of time, the cost of which gets lower over time as you make more and more power of it. We can debate in every single utility their power generation, but the cost of grid power goes up over time because they're an operating business. They have input costs that are market driven many times, and guess what? The grid is old, it has to be replaced, so there's going to be cost improvements that they have to make as well. So what you're talking about is the one source of energy that you put in place. The panels we use today have a 30-year warranty for production and a 40-year service life. So they are premium level efficiency at standard level cost now. That's how much the designs have improved, and they improve every single year. So my system's already paid off in almost half the time I originally predicted. I was factoring in a 5% energy and inflation rate annually, and in Mankato the cost of power has gone up 10% a year since 2018. And so for me, I was going to do it regardless, but what you end up seeing is the value you get out of it is greater than that.
So Sam, you've put in solar, and why?
Numerous reasons. It's cost saving, reduces your carbon footprint, relatively self-sustaining, and now it seems like a great time to capitalize on the financial incentives that make it possible. So I have no issues with it so far.
Yeah, I guess for us it would have been my mom making the decisions, but I think for her it was definitely a large part environmental, but then also cost saving, and that like we didn't pay electricity bills, and we had big chest freezers full of food, full of meat and vegetables. So, I mean, it covered our electricity needs.
So what factors need to be considered before installing a solar system? Gary, why don't you start with that?
Well, if you're a home, if you're a residence, and you're limited in land space, then you have to factor in how much roof space do you have. You can only put so much solar up there, you only have certain angles. East and west performs better when it's a real shallow angle, south performs better up here when it's steeper. But you're talking about small percentages and changes, and of course also shading. So whenever we do an estimate for somebody, we're always looking first and foremost, what available room do they have? How will it perform? And then we ask them, we find out their bills and what their goals are. It goes back to what Jim said. What are what are your primary goals? So are you wanting to offset the bill fully, or are you wanting to just make some power and save some on your bill? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to have an off-grid generation in a backup scenario when the grid goes down, as opposed to a gasoline generator that you have to maintain? I mean, there's a lot of things you have to consider, so we ask them a lot of questions and also show them how to interpret their utility bill, because most people don't even pay attention to that at all. So
No, sure.
there's a number of cost factors in there that need to be considered.
Matt, anything you want to add to that?
No, I actually just had a question. I actually wondered what the climate actually will do for like these newer solar panels. Are they like susceptible, or do they react better to like high temperatures or low temperatures? Or is it more just like that it doesn't really matter anymore?
Well, you being an electric guy, you know that heat generally degrades electric performance. So in any situation, you're always going to do better. Like when we install solar, we have to factor in a plus 25% overrating for when it's freezing or below. Because always cold weather is going to make solar perform better, more efficiently. Because obviously there's heat generation just by making power.
Yeah. Is there a threshold like 110 is like starting to derate, or like below freeze? I mean, I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So your output on your panels is standard rated at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Your severe derating really has to do with when you get over about 105. You're not going to see a lot of derating. You will see some derating above 95. You know, 3 or 4 or 5% up here. It's generally not as bad, but you can go down to the desert in Arizona, and if it's 125, 130 degrees, you know, the system's off by 40% because of the heat. Now, there are, what they're doing in that situation is they're putting small DC rated fans, if it's a ground mount, and they're just moving the air, and that's all it takes. A DC motor is a lot more efficient, so you're not talking about very many watts to make them run, and they're just running, you know, during the day as the heat builds up and keeps it cooler under there. I have seen systems, we don't deal in them because they're not really necessary up here, but there are some roof mount systems that you can do that with if you're in really hot places like the tropics.
Sure, so they do kind of have that figured out, and that's, yeah, that was all that I was leading into is, you know, if you could do an equation pretty easy of figuring out how many days you have above that threshold and below, and you can kind of, you know, maybe figure out if it suits your needs or area or region.
One of the things that is happening now is there's so much intellectual questioning and also demand for solar that the build out is getting larger and larger in terms of the industrial building of these panels and the technology around them. Right now, one company in the world out of Germany, Bergermeyer, holds the most current international patent for the polysilica cell and how to manufacture it. So everybody that makes solar panels has to abide by that patent, and they pay them rights. But what they do is they engineer around the parameters of that patent to gain efficiencies in all sorts of ways, including what you were just asking about. How do we make solar perform better in the heat when it tends to derate more?
I think it is getting better, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, compared to the older days.
Yeah, the performance difference, 1973 PV was first commercialized. At that time, it was $100 a watt. And you could get a solar panel about like this. It just became decommissioned, you know, from top secret, from the space and aeronautics industry, defense industry. So every year since then, the performance, the power output has gone up 11% a year, and the cost per watt's gone down 11% per year. And that still is happening. It's a 22% gain every single year. So the panels we're installing now are 500 to 550 watt premium panels at a standard price. They're cheaper now than when I bought my 360 watt panels in 2018, and they were supposedly the premium panels at the time. So we're seeing gains every single year in efficiency and power output.
That difference from 2018 to 2023?
Yes. If you've ever heard of Moore's Law.
Yeah, I know, it's like, do we wait, is it, you know, it just gets better.
There's a concept called Moore's Law in semiconductors. It basically says that for every time you double production, you exponentially gain processing power. It's why we have these now. This would have been buildings worth of computers back in the 50s, okay? So the same thing is happening in batteries and also PV. There are new PV technologies coming out in terms of higher efficiency, smaller footprint in terms of production that are being prototyped, and it's just a matter of time before they become scaled up and commercialized. And having more build out in the United States really helps that, because we are the biggest value add industry model in the world. We still produce more value added goods than anywhere else combined. You know, well, there's a lot of low end stuff made elsewhere, but all the high end stuff and all the high efficiency stuff is made here, and the market is constantly expanding.
And on top of that mega efficiency increase that you talked about, the panels are getting larger and larger too, right?
No, the footprint of that 500 watt panel that we're installing is basically the same size as the ones I have on my roof.
The 3.5 by 7?
It's, the ones I put on my roof are 80 inches long and 40 inches wide. Yeah, so, and that's pretty standard for the old, what they call 72 cell. But now they split those cells, which increases the voltage, increases the output, and now we're dealing in 156 cell panels in the same footprint that we were once dealing in 72 cells. So yeah, it's every single year they close out their production in October and they say, okay, our last run for this year is going to deliver sometime at the end of December, and we're coming out with a new version of it, and it's usually 20 to 30 to 40 watts more output for the same footprint.
What about solar shingles?
Ah, great question. So first of all, you're at best going to make half your power if you're facing north, because we're in the northern hemisphere, right? So the sun is never going to hit them directly. So that side is really, you're only doing it because you want uniformity. When you're talking about solar shingles that actually look like formed shingles, it's an entirely different PV technology to be able to bend it that way and make it form. So it's a lot lower efficiency, a lot higher cost, plus the problem with them is you have to factor in a 15% breakage rate, both on the shipping side and also the installation side. So we're talking about not really ever penciling out for a payback. You're just doing it because you got money burning a hole in your pocket and you want the tax credit, and it's cool, right? There is a company in Texas that are making solar shingles that are just like your regular asphalt shingles that you can bam, 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 have a regular roofer put them on, and that way you can mix and match. You can put them in places that are good for sun, and then not in places, and basically have the roof looking uniform. And that guy's really expanding.
So you're not wasting them, then
That's right. Yeah, it'll be easier for installation. The only issue with that right now, when you get a new technology like that, everything is about scale. So like my house is 1,000 square foot Rambler with a basement, okay? It would not pencil out because I'd have to buy so many shingles and I'd have to get them from a certified installer from Texas. You know, it's one of those things where once all that becomes kind of, you get the economies of scale throughout the country, then you're going to see mass adoption with that. As it is right now, the static solid cells that we're seeing a typical solar panel, there's literally millions of those getting made every year, and they're readily available. And, you know, their cost per watt is anywhere from 60 to 80 cents a watt, you know, even on the retail market. So that's a big difference from $100 a watt. You go back up to solar shingles, you know, you're going to be 3 times that cost, you know, and that's before installation. So they still have a ways to go. If you're in Texas and you're down the road from where the guy's making them and you're willing to buy enough of them, they could probably pencil out in that scenario. And that's going to get more and more, there will be more companies that will copy that. And as that happens, then it'll become more affordable for everybody.
But GAF is now producing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a common carrier up here, GAF shingle.
Yeah, but you still have to have the roofer that has the certification and the account, meaning he has to buy, or she has to buy a certain number of them, and they have to be certified. There's a lot of cost add-ons to be able to carry them. A regular roofer, unless they're really big, is not going to do it. Because he also now has to become a solar installer. And his business is get the roof contract, get it up, get out of there as fast as we can. From an installer point of view, we follow up, we monitor our systems for warranty protection. We work with the utility companies. You know, the utility company reserves the right, if your system is not performing correctly, they can come out at any time and shut it down. And we don't want that. We sold you the system. We know the customer doesn't want it. You know, they bought the system, and the utility doesn't want it too, because then they got to make the drive out and tell them, sorry, but we got to shut it down. It's not operating correctly. So for us, we already plan on following up with the customer, whereas a roofer is one and done until the next time you get a claim. So yeah, there are some barriers to entry. It could be done up here, yes. You need a really big one, willing to do it and put the outlay, yes.
Do you think there's any value in like roof longevity with having not necessarily the solar shingles, but like the actual panels?
Yes.
With the coverage, will it, you know, make your roof last long?
It's a shield for the part that it's covering. You know, I mean, like we had all the hailstorms in southern Minnesota last year, and part of what we do that a lot of other solar companies won't do because they just don't want the hassle is we'll work with people who maybe have solar installed from somebody else who won't come out, and they have an insurance claim. There is a line item on the insurance where if you have a hail claim, then the insurance will pay a line item to have the solar taken off, the roof put back on, and the solar reinstalled. We just got done doing a couple of those in Mankato. And so the roof itself, we pulled the solar panels off. It is brand new underneath, shredded everywhere else.
Yeah.
So like if you had the ability to, if you have a, let's say you have a corrugated metal roof that's got 4x8 sheets, and you put the roof on, the paneling on in a way where you could remove the paneling but leave the solar on, that paneling underneath will be brand new. And when you put racking, you're running racking across your trusses, so you're strengthening that part of the roof. You're adding another set of cross members.
So you're getting probably even more snow load.
Yes, by far. Yeah, I mean, we can't get anything permitted or anything through, the utility company would never allow us to put something on that's going to be a danger. We're not even going to be able to start the project until it goes through the state and everything is good with everybody. And again, our vested interest is to stay in business, so we don't want the roof coming down either. But as a general rule, you've got a structural rigidity across your main load-bearing members. And then also the panels now, they're across your rails. So now you have another set of structural members crossing those. So it is quite strong, yes. Another reason to still advocate for the traditional style panel, because it protects your roof.
It doesn't matter if you have a metal roof or a shingle, any kind of surface underneath is fine.
Yes. There's a dozen racking companies now. We use Iron Ridge, which is one of the longest standing. And they have engineers that they look at every single roofing type from tile to the real high-end stuff. And they have an attachment that fits for every single one of those with the minimum level of penetration. And wherein, if it's, again, installed correctly, it won't void the warranty on your roof. And for us, again, my partner, he was a construction contractor before he got into solar. So he was building post-frame buildings, and he grew up on a farm, repaired hotels in hurricane land in Florida. And that's part of the reason I partnered with him, because I didn't want to put solar up that then has a leak in the roof. That's the worst thing, is having to come back, take them all down, find the leak, fix it, put them all back up. So the system that they have now, there's pretty much no way you're going to get a leak in there. Again, if you follow the instructions and do it correctly, and you have
heavy-duty wind, like 70, 80 miles an hour doesn't...
You have to be wind load rated for it to pass, for you to get a building permit.
So what is it? How much wind?
It's, the standard rating in Minnesota, I think, is 105 miles an hour.
Yeah, we don't usually get that around here.
And again, it's kind of like the hail thing. Solar panels are warranted for golf ball size hail 50 miles an hour. But you have to remember, the hail has got to hit the thing direct. And you can go online and watch YouTube videos of how they test these things. It's tempered glass. It's the same material that's on your windshield. And then it has an aluminum frame and then a solid back sheet behind it. It's quite strong. Okay? If the hail is big enough to destroy your panels, you're darn sure going to have an insurance claim on the rest of your roof. What my partner and I, he's got a lot more experience than I do since 2009. We've installed all the way south to Texas and Oklahoma and never had a hail claim. We have over 300 systems in the field. So, including my parents in Oklahoma. And they get the really big hail. They had baseball size. I told my dad, like, get the roofing people out there, you're gonna have another claim. So, but didn't hurt the panels. The only time we ever see an issue, we've had a couple of farmers with ground mounts. They have an open-ended deck mower running across gravel road. Gravel comes out, pings the panel, puts a star in it, just like when you're driving down the road and you get behind a dump truck, it gets a star. Well, the panel still worked, but moisture will get in there and eventually corrupt the cell. So we were able to get returns on those. Companies, we told them what happened, they still replaced the panel, even though they really technically weren't a warranty. So for us, we use local suppliers too. That protects us as well. When you have people in Minneapolis, people in Minnesota who are supplying you, then if our customer calls us and they have an issue or a problem with the equipment, then we contact that local supplier too.
Where are your units manufactured?
What's that?
Where are your units manufactured that you sell?
Most of what we get is domestically made or assembled. You have to remember, well, a couple things, and we won't go into a huge supply chain thing because there's like 1,200 supply chain steps in this, in 50 different countries, okay? That being said, the 80% of the world's best silica quartz comes out of a couple of mines in North Carolina, okay? And then they get shipped overseas. They were getting shipped overseas, and the actual polysilica was made into a wafer with subsidized labor and subsidized industry, and then getting dumped on the market. And so part of a lot of the legislation that's been going through in the last period of time is to bring a lot of that back into North America. That's why the NAFTA II agreement was put together. There's all sorts of new build-ons. So we're already getting cells being made in Michigan and Georgia and in places domestically, including Mexico, which are our closest trading partner. But yeah, the polysilica cells, there's still a lot of them made in Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, but they have to prove that the company is not based or financed from China to be able to, for that cell to qualify and come over here. So we have separate unilateral trade agreements with those countries to ensure that we're not subsidizing, underpaid or slave labor, whatever you want to call it. And that's a good thing. That kind of transparency is helpful for us, and it's only going to help our economy too. So, yeah.
In the racking systems you use, how often does that contact the roof? Every 6 feet, every 8 feet in the grid, or?
Yeah, you're, again, under normal circumstances, you're 4 foot on center on all your penetrations. It depends on the type of roof and the type of material.
Vertically and horizontally?
Well, yeah, you're going to be, obviously your joists or your trusses are vertical. So you're 4 foot on center. Yep, and your connection points are single penetrations within a rail bracket, if you will, that then the rail attaches to from there. But there's usually a flashing, then there's a grommet. We've pre-drilled a hole, fill it with expanding silicone, but the screw-on piece that you attach the rail to, I mean, there's, if I can show you, I got one in my car, I should have brought it in here. There's no way water's getting in there.
But is that every 7 feet up, the height of the collectors, another rail?
Yeah, what you're gonna, if this is your panel here, you're gonna take a third in, well, a quarter in on each side, and your rail's gonna run there, yes. Yeah, you're not gonna attach it on the end, you're gonna be in here.
Right.
Okay, and that's how you locate your rails. Yeah.
Going up a roof with multiple.
Yeah, I use the software where you put in all the functions. You put, pitch and all of your codes, all your building codes, your build, and then you put in your, what type of panel you're gonna put in, its dimensional size and weight. And then it will go in there and take climactic data, latitude, longitude, house data, and will give you a racking plan that has engineering stamps on it for the state that you're in. And then, of course, we submit that for a permit. The state engineer or city engineer, whoever is looking at it first, they'll either pass it or fail it. I mean, they'll look at it, make sure that everything is within their parameters, their calculations, if you will.
So they're all stationary, or do you have some that rotate depending on
This is kind of like wind.
Summer and winter.
Yeah, this is kind of like wind. Wind generators are great, but they have moving parts. If you're talking about small scale, which is primarily what we do, there are other companies which, Ralph Cater was here earlier in the day, and they do really big systems. In those situations where you're talking grid scale, they will have trackers, which is what you're talking about. But they usually will have, with them, they'll have some kind of service contract where they'll have people that will go out there and they will monitor things and make sure, because we've all driven by places where the trackers stop working. You got all the trackers looking in one direction and there's one over there. It's like, what the heck is going on? That thing's not working. For us, as a small installer, a tracker does 2 things that we would not want. One, it adds moving parts, so it adds maintenance. Most people don't want to pay for the maintenance. The benefit of solar is you put it in and it makes power consistently over time and with no maintenance and no cost inputs, or what we call near zero maintenance costs, okay? With the tracker, you have moving parts. So something will either have to be maintained or it'll break, right? But the other thing about it is you'll pay more for the tracker than you will for the rest of the whole system. So with a small scale installation, it won't pencil out.
But if you do a solar garden, or is that what you have up by Lake Crystal?
Yeah, so that's stationary though, it's not a track.
Oh.
So I will give you a really good example. We have a guy who is a farmer. He absolutely loves solar like me, so we're like kindred spirits. He was a journeyman electrician, but he's retired now. And he put solar in, we didn't do it, but he really got into this, what's called seasonal adjustable. What it is it has the cradle that holds your panels, and it basically is a lever system. You have to have 2 people to be able to operate it. So imagine like a push button that comes in, and then you move the lever to change the angle manually. And then it locks back into place. We have to have 2 people on either end to be able to do that. They have to be strong enough too, to handle the weight.
And they have to be up on the roof?
No, on the ground.
Oh.
This would be a ground mount. You would not do it on the roof. You would not do it on the roof.
Okay.
No. No, the days of I know this was done in the 70s and 80s because we've actually maintained some of those systems. The days of having the panel at an entirely different angle than the roof are pretty well gone because there's been enough high wind events that the shear on that, there's no way that somebody's gonna pay to actually reinforce the roof that much by today's standards.
Snow load catch too.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember, most codes started as a lawsuit, right? I mean, somebody did something, there was no regulation, and then something happens, and then somebody sues somebody, and then all of a sudden now it's legislation, okay? So the days where you have a roof like this and then panels that look like that are long gone. You're gonna be what we call flush mount, which is gonna basically be the same angle as your roof, yeah. And when it is flush mount, it's close, so it doesn't have near the wind load either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is part of your roof. I realize it's slightly above it, but there is an adjustment too that we can make with the rail to really get it as close as possible to the roof, yeah.
Let's move in a little bit, and we'll get back to some of these others, because I've got a lot of questions on here, but the process of deciding to buy solar, and you have to go to the city. Matt and Carissa, maybe you can talk about your experience.
Yeah, so we have two interconnection policies. One's with Missouri River, and then one's with, well, Minnesota or the city. And I know you did it before I was there, but I think it's simple. We kind of have it figured out now. It's just getting approved and asking to be, and you will be approved. You know, it's just a matter of getting the right information and paying the fees and getting the metering done. So.
Yeah, so I can talk about what we did. So, and I was really grateful to get a lot of advice from someone I knew. Well, Brad DeVos, he came to our first Climate Smart meeting, but he's from St. Peter, and he was a friend of a friend, and he gave me all this advice because he had just gotten solar panels like the year before, and so like we were talking about roofs a lot, and one of the first things he said to me was, if you know you're going to need to reshingle your roof in the next 15 years-ish, don't do solar yet, because the cost of taking panels down and putting them back up is going to be, several $1,000s, and so you want to wait till you already have the fresh shingles before you put on the
Or
solar.
reshingle your roof.
Or yeah, exactly. So anyway, that was one point, and then let's see. So, I mean, then it's like we talked about what is your goal? Is it to save money? Is it just the environmental part? You want to check your electric bills. Go back at least a year. What is my usage, and what electric needs am I looking for? Like if you anticipate getting an electric car, you might be wanting to get more than what your current usage is if you're trying to offset all of that. And yeah, I mean.
Was it a very, back, as Matt wasn't there yet, was the
No.
process when you did it,
So
getting the permit from the city, was that much of a hassle?
Well, no, because I didn't do that part. Like the contractor did that part.
Okay.
So we got two different quotes so that we could, and they did they checked like, okay, what is your exact roof situation? How much shading is there? What's the angle? And then they had these models that would predict what the production would look like, and this is how many. If you use 16 panels, we ended up going with 14 panels, and then one thing Brad told me was you want to make sure you get a contractor, like a legitimate one. He's like, there are some people who will say, now it's your job to go talk to the utility company. It's your job to get all these permits. It's not your job, it's their job, and they know what they're doing. So, our contractor took care of pretty much all that, gave us the forms, we signed them, and it was pretty easy. There was kind of a hassle getting the billing figured out before you came. And we're doing net metering, which is different than net billing. And anyway, so that was the thing. But now it's working, so. Yeah, but like getting different quotes, and then once we had the quote, we just moved forward, and it went. I mean, from the first time we got the quote to when it was fully functional was probably a month and a half, 2 months. It was quick.
So do you produce most of your own electricity most of the time?
Not in the winter. Well, not this past winter. Well, I was also going to talk about snow, which is a question later, but those panels are really thick. Like, so you kind of have to get a roof rake, or at least on ours we have a roof rake, and you know, it's like a hard plastic shovel basically. You're scraping across these panels, but it's fine. It doesn't hurt them. And if it's a little bit warm, they slide off really easily. But if it's like, you know, the late December, you know, like 0 degrees and like this much snow, it took some work, but if you want a good workout.
I've seen it where, I know what she's talking about, there's like an ice dam, like if you, where the, like
Right
the
on
two
the
roof
edge.
lines come together and it builds up there and it's like,
Yeah.
I'm sure difficult.
So our production has been a little lower. Like I went back last night and I was checking based on what the projections were and what we've actually made. And so I have an app on my phone where I can check the production with a separate meter from the city's meter, and I don't think they fully quite align exactly, and I don't know why. But according to my app, I think we're at, it projected we would make about 40 kilowatt hours per year, but we're more like 6,000. I don't know why. Part of it could be weather, snow, rain, you know.
Part of why.
We had a hard winter this winter. you
Yeah.
know, I mean, harder
Yeah.
than we've had.
It was really
yeah.
bad, because we've had it for about 20 months now, and this past winter was a lot worse than the previous winter. So, you know, so I'm not sure, but.
Kurt Blumgren said on his, he's had it for 8 years. He had a whole month without production, and
Yeah.
that was,
Well, foot and a half
Like
of
December.
snow.
and he said that's the
Never
only
really-
time that's happened in 8 years though. You know,
Well, and we talked about this in the earlier meeting. When you do a PV watts report or any kind of solar projection, it'll give a base number, which is kind of like a weather modeling, but it will also give a range that's in the small print. The other thing too, you mentioned that your production from your app doesn't match what they're showing because you're consuming part of what you're making at the time of
The meter
production.
only shows what's actually, what
People
you're not,
get-
you're using.
People get enamored by the idea that I'm sending power out and then getting compensation for it, but actually your best payback is using your power while you are making it, because guess what? Your power isn't, you're not just charged for electricity, there is a fuel cost adjustment in there in case the utility has to ask for more power at distance, because everyone turned on their air conditioner well, a couple weeks in a row at 4 o'clock, and now we've
Yeah.
exceeded what our base level production is. So now you have to ask for peak load, which is way more expensive, okay? So you're offsetting that, you're also offsetting the sales tax too when you're, so we're in a modern era. I program everything that I can, and I have a washer and dryer and a dishwasher to come on when my solar is making power, because guess what? I get more value out of it when I'm using it than when I'm sending it out to the grid.
And some of it could be probably your lifestyle too, so if you're like somebody who works from home, you may have that option where you're, you know, both mom and dad are working or whatever, and then nobody's there to use it then.
I encourage people to take a strategy that combines not just power production on the solar side, but efficiency.
Wash your clothes, do your
Econ- you know,
dishwasher during the middle of the day.
You want to save yourself 4 solar panels worth of production? Dry all your clothes by hanging them. Don't use your dryer, okay? Get a heat pump hot water heater. That's worth 7 solar panels worth of production. Plus, you have to duct your heat pump hot water heater so you can take out hot air where you don't want it and exhaust cold air where you want it. So I pull hot air out of my garage and exhaust it around my air conditioning condenser. That is refrigerated air coming out of that hot water heater. This is a reverse refrigeration process.
Then we have rebates for that.
Just saying, right?
I would throw one more.
It's a deal, Matt.
I would emphasize one more thing, because there was a discussion earlier today about net metering and what is the value, why are we paying these people retail rates? And what I would say is that it's worth more than you think, because if any of you have a load control device on your air conditioner, load control device, you hook on there and the utility reserves the right, if there's extra demand, they'll turn your air conditioning off for a while and they'll give you a discount for it. Okay? And there's not one utility that I have ever looked to get an interconnection from that doesn't have those kind of efficiency rebates and discounts. Why? Because they don't want the area to exceed its base load power needs, its grid demand, because then they have to import power from distance, which costs more money, which then they have to pass on to the ratepayers. And their responsibility is to do what? Provide reliable, affordable energy. So you are reducing your grid demand. Everybody that puts solar on their property, the grid's not going away. The grid guys are managing the electrons. An electron is an electron regardless of where it is produced. It's way more efficient when it's used where it's produced.
Yeah, and so just for the net metering, for those who have no idea what this is, like I did 2 years ago. So when you don't have any production, you pay 11 cents. What is it per?
8.2.
8.2 cents per kilowatt hour that you use in your house. So if I'm producing a kilowatt hour, I don't have to pay that 8 cents. But if I produce more than I'm using, that excess goes straight into the grid and gets metered, and at the end of the month, they count, what was that extra that you produced for us, and then we would get paid 4 cents per excess. So it used to be 2.
Yeah,
Right.
and
It
it's
was
keeping, it's trending
So,
up,
and it was
so.
like, that seems really unfair, like I pay 8 cents when I'm using one, but I only get paid 2 cents when I produce one. So it's much more advantageous to use it
Just like
rather
Gary
than
said,
have the
yeah.
excess.
Your best
But
payoff
again,
is
yeah.
using your own power as
Exactly.
much as you can.
So it's not a great idea to oversize it probably unless, and I was gonna ask you this, is there good storage options for?
Yeah, and they keep getting, it's amazing. So I told you there's 22% gains in efficiency and lower costs with solar. It's 28% for battery technology. There are plenty of places we install all over the country, mainly in the Midwest, but also down in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas. And they get more sun in the winter than we do. We get really good sun between March and October, which you would have been overproducing in October last year because we were extremely dry,
Yeah, and
very
then
clear.
December hit and.
You have to remember, you're never going to make that much in the winter, even in the best winter. Okay, because we only have 7 hours of sunlight, and we have more seasonal cloud cover than a lot of other places in the country. So where you're going to make it is, between the equinoxes.
And when you have 27 days in a row that are below 10 degrees, it's like.
Right. So do you all have let me ask you this, do you have a time of use option that residents can opt in?
Right now, we do not,
Okay.
because we use a drive-by system, but as we go into AMI, will be how our load profiling will start happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So all the utilities are gearing up for this because they
Explain
anticipate.
that a little bit, time of use?
So time of use, well, you can, or time of use, so what, yeah.
No, we do not use the time of use rate. Basically, the rate is based, it can change by the hour.
Oh,
It's
okay.
based on more, so when you have like the peak load may be between 1 and 5 in the afternoon, your higher price electricity could be 1 and 5. And then maybe it starts dropping off between 5 and 6 or whatever.
Okay.
So it all depends on
It's not a
what
set
that
rate,
sort of
it's
cost
an
is,
adjustable
electricity
rate.
is, and it adjusts.
It's trying to keep
For
the
based on-
power providers'
Yeah.
demand low, so you're
Yeah.
not hitting that peak early on, and then you gotta, you're stuck with that.
Then
the
you're
rest
paying.
So
of it.
it's essentially what it's like, so Xcel has an option now. A lot of, even the co-ops have the time of use option, either if you have an electric vehicle and you want to put a sub-meter on there. What they're doing is they're discounting the rate when demand is low, which is nighttime. All the business services are closed, most of them are, and everyone's in bed, most of them are. Okay?
Charge your car then.
So so what they're doing is they're saying, so
Customer.
I'll give you an example, my example in Xcel. okay? You can opt into this, but it's not mandated right now. So if I go into a time of use rate option, they're gonna charge me half cost on low demand times. They're gonna charge me 2.5 times the normal rate, so it ends up being with fuel and tax around 25 cents a kilowatt hour from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, okay? On non-holiday weekdays, okay? Then the rest of the time, I'm paying, the base rate is 4.18 cents per kilowatt hour. So when you, what you can do is you can size your solar slightly smaller, build it in a way to then charge batteries, and then the idea is you're gonna run off-grid during peak hours, and then you're gonna run on-grid at a discount the rest of the time. So you're avoiding the 25 cents a kilowatt hour, plus you're benefiting the utility because you're reducing grid demand, okay?
Can you use your car as your battery storage?
I've heard you can do that with like a Ford Lightning, like
Yeah, I
a
mean,
really
you
huge
charge your
battery.
You can, they're not doing a lot of that right now, but I mean, it's possible. I mean, the Ford Lightning, like she's saying, you can get, it can come where you can get the, I can't remember what they're calling it, but basically it's the, comes with a transfer switch and everything, where it can actually be reversed and feed your home in the case of a power outage. I don't know of any utilities right now that are using the car batteries as sort of as a shift in their power usage, or someone using it as a shift in their power usage. More right now, it's for an outage purpose. Because it's a little bit different if you're using it to shift when you use it, so that's where like a home battery is one of those things.
These are getting a little closer to time here. Let's talk a little bit about tax incentives and payback.
Okay,
So,
you want me to go?
sure.
Okay, so if you are a homeowner, property owner, we're talking about a residence or a business, there is a 30% tax credit. If it's a business, it's called the investment tax credit. If you're just a regular property owner, it's a residential solar efficiency credit, is really what it is. The tax form is IRS 5695, line 1. It's the same form you get the rebate for all the high efficiency appliances for too. So you've got a 30% benefit there only if you owe taxes. If you are in a situation where you do not pay federal income tax, then you don't get that credit. Okay? The other thing is...
It's only on federal then, not state.
That's correct. The state incentive is the net metering law, and it has been around since 1981. And Minnesota is one of the few states that actually has a pure net metering law. So it's like I said before, you go to South Dakota, they take your energy and say thank you. There is no compensation for it. So in places like that, we only build self-consumption systems. Self-consumption meaning solar and batteries, and you're splitting time between on and off the grid, okay? So that's the tax credit. And you still have to pay for the system or finance it. That's the heavy lift. You're paying for 25 to 30 years of energy up front under warranty, okay? Just like you bought your house. You had to make a big down payment. If you are an operating business, you can also depreciate the business. You can depreciate the cost of the system, which, depending on the tax basis of the use of it, it's 25 to 30% more after depreciating it for 5 years.
What about the battery then? Is there anything?
Batteries are included.
So 30% on the battery too?
One of the changes in the law basically said that you don't have to charge them fully with solar. In fact, you don't even have to have solar with them. You go to California or parts of New England where their peak rates are 45 to 60 cents a kilowatt hour, and
People put batteries in so they don't bypass it.
time of use is mandated. Time of use is mandated. Now you don't have an option. Okay, the demand is too high. They have to curb demand. They're doing it with pricing because nobody else likes mandates either. Okay, so they're basically saying, if you're gonna wash your clothes, do it at night, right? Don't do it during the day. Darn sure don't charge a car during the day. Okay, so in those systems, you just put a battery. You don't even need solar. You can put a battery system in, run off grid during peak times, and then recharge your batteries at night at a third of the cost. So in that scenario, it pencils out. The hardware cost is pretty standard throughout the system, okay? I mean, with solar, our hard costs are $1.55 a watt, And then depending on the size of the system, there's obviously, if we install it, there's install costs in permitting and all the other things. But that cost per watt is pretty consistent throughout the country. There's not a different price for solar and batteries in California, really. Because I can always buy it from Minnesota where it's less and have it shipped out there, okay? So the higher the cost of electricity is, the more value solar and batteries are. And I always tell people this, because every utility, every area is different. Every power generation source that a utility has and every contract is different. But the one thing that is consistent, I mean, think about what your rates were here in St. James 5 years ago. What were they 10 years ago? Are they the same? Great, you won the lottery. Because almost nowhere else are they. So part of putting solar and or batteries, you're getting a certain amount of power under warranty for a given amount of time, and you pay up front for it one time. So the longer you have it, the more value it generates. You're basically offsetting grid power that naturally goes up over time. Because utilities are businesses too, they have operating costs. And so are power producers. They have input costs, they have transportation costs, they have delivery costs, all that stuff, so.
You can actually forward the tax credit. If you can't use it
Yes.
all in 1 year, do you have up to 5 years to use it, or is there any limit?
So we've asked people this, accountants. So as long as the law is current, so the law that gives you the tax credits and the depreciation value first was passed in 2005, and it's been updated every single time it's come up, regardless of who's in Congress, because it's extremely popular.
Yeah.
Okay? And now what they've done is they've extended it to 2032 for the full 30%. 2033 it's 26%, and 2034 it's 22%. So as long as the law is current, this is what my accountant tells me. As long as it's current, you can keep rolling that credit forward. Okay? They haven't ever tested with the IRS if the credit law was to sunset. There would be a lawsuit, and then it would get determined by the IRS. So one other area of benefit, so the government views net meter revenue as a energy efficiency subsidy paid to you by the utility for using less power, and therefore it's not taxable by the IRS. So if you make money by generating power and overproducing versus what you use, if you get a credit or you get a check, that's not taxable. And again, everyone asks me that, and I send them the IRS rulings. It's been challenged multiple times, and it's held since 2010.
So your credit against, say you're retired, you don't pay a lot of taxes.
Right.
You can forward 1 year.
You can forward all the way through 2032. You can forward.
Okay, that's forward going to 3032. How about retro?
That's good. That would
Did they say earlier that you could take some of it off last year's taxes?
Yes.
You can get rebated
Yes.
back for putting a system
Yeah,
in
you
this
can.
year.
There is a look back period.
And that's 1 year.
I think it's 1 year. Again, a lot of this stuff is getting reconstituted. There's a lot of ebb and flow right now. I'd say it's even hard for us to keep up because they are writing new correspondence to it. But from what it was, there was a 1 year look back. Yes.
We use the word payback. Typically, in our area, would it be 7 years, 10 years? Depends upon usage, I know.
It depends more upon what you're factoring in for inflation of grid power.
Okay.
And here's, like, we used to use 3.5% annual, but my partner's been doing this long enough. We were using a 20-year average, and we were using, basically cost averaging among all the utilities that we have experience with in Minnesota. And we raised it about 1.5 years ago to 5%. If you look at data, the data points to about 10%. And I know it's been 10% in my area. Now, there are a lot of factors involved in that. You all have hydroelectric power, right? So that base level is pretty consistent and doesn't have a lot of cost inputs. Doesn't mean it doesn't have zero cost inputs. Stuff has to get taken offline and rebuilt. Stuff has to get maintained. And then there are other cost inputs. So the debate for payback always, what we typically figure for payback is you take the net cost of the system. So if you get a tax credit, you would reduce it by the tax credit. If you depreciate it, you reduce it by the depreciation as well. And then we will take whatever the first year value generation would be, and we project it forward 5 years with inflation. So like for here, it would probably be more like 3.5% or 4% instead of 5 or even 10. Just because this is a lot more consistent. Yeah. You have to weigh also how fast is your area growing, or is it shrinking? If you have less new accounts coming online, then your grid demand is going to go down, right? If you have a consistent population that's not growing at all, your grid demand is going to be very consistent. Okay, so again, those all affect grid costs as well. Not to mention, the distance of your transmission lines. So like if you're south central, you have to carry a lot of power long distance versus if you're in town, where it's generally a short distance.
And how consistent are we in St. James?
It's been about the same.
Since you got here?
Yeah, well, since I've got here, but even for the 9 years that I was here before I went to Lake Crystal for 6, it's about the same.
So we're just, we're hanging on, we're
Yep.
steady as you go.
What we see every once in a while is we'll have an influx, they'll call it a drought adder, that'll come, and what happens is this, the Yellowstone area, that actually is kind of funny, the snowpack up there is what drains into the Missouri River, and that decides how much water flow we get. So it actually isn't necessarily, people think like rain here, but it's not here.
It's out there.
Yeah, and it's actually not rain, it's snowpack. Yeah, so it's just, and every once in a while we'll get a 1% drought adder that,
And we raised our rates in January, otherwise we hadn't raised them in 12 years. So you'll find that some of these areas are very stable.
And this has
And
been
some of them
stable,
are
right?
more, we've been,
So you're
You also,
calculating payback can really vary depending upon where you're
Yes,
at.
well, I can tell you, because dealing with all the solar installs, so ones that when I first started, 13 years ago, we're getting predictions that our rate was gonna be 17 cents, and these people were thinking they're gonna get all this payback. Well, guess what? Our rate basically has been the same.
Yeah.
And so some of these people aren't very happy with what some of their payback predictions were.
Right.
So, and that can happen, it does vary, but then all of a sudden you can have sort of a big uptick. What can happen, you can go along like this, all of a sudden you get a tick like this, and then you can go along, further than,
So like-
now cost of material and stuff is really, is gonna be one of those
The
things.
nuts comes down to bolts. Your system is working against a 14 cent per kilowatt in Mankato area.
mine, yes.
Ours would be working against an 8 cent.
Correct.
So if you have the pleasure of a payback in 7 years for your system, which you
Ours was estimated at 15 here.
ours would be more like 15.
Yeah, but
Because our energy is just a lower cost to start with the Missouri River.
Yeah, you also have to weigh, like, everything ages. So how old is our infrastructure? Rural electrification happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of pieces and parts of that grid are still there, including energy generation as well. All that stuff has to get replaced, rebuilt. Again, this goes back to what you think in terms of, and like, I'm not an expert, but I do know that stuff has to get rebuilt from time to time. And that adds cost to the system regardless.
I mean, it doesn't last forever.
Doesn't last forever. And so, you do have the benefit of solar. The reason I got mine was because I knew the length of time that it was going to produce. And I liked that idea, and I also knew I was going to be in my home for quite a long time too. And I liked the other benefits to it as well. Yeah, I mean.
Do you have a battery?
I do. I'm going to add more.
Okay, so how many systems do you sell just solar and how many solar with battery? What's the sale in this part of the country?
Oh, and do you think the payback is faster with battery or?
Well, see, this is where, what is the value of being able to stay in your home when the power is out? Like, people will buy, it's kind of like,
Or you could say a generator is $5,000, so that can go towards your batteries.
if that's, yeah, if you wanted to, so we're certified with a number of systems, but Generac is probably the most common. They own the backup diesel, gas, and propane generation market, have for 60 years, okay? You get a hardwired one, a Guardian, that's, 15 to 25K, that thing is gonna cost you $15,000 installed. And that's not without service, and you still have to pay for the fuel inputs. Well,
For a once or twice a year use?
well, it depends. Again, we have customers that, because they're at the end of a feeder line, sometimes there's a lot of variability, and they'll get ebbs and flows.
If you have a hot barn, you don't want things going down.
It's based on, a lot of it's based on location
Yeah.
and time of year, too. So for them, they like the stability of, when you have an automatic transfer switch, it has a voltage sensor on it. So when grid voltage drops below a certain point, it automatically clicks over, you're on the batteries, you won't even know you're on the batteries. Okay? If you have somebody or something at home that needs to have constant power 24/7, and you don't ever want that shutting off, what's that worth? So the answer is, well, you could buy a gas generator, you don't get a tax credit for that one, and it's a machine, you still have to maintain it, you still have to service it, you still have to fuel it, okay? Or you can get a battery backup system with a 10-year warranty or an energy throughput warranty, that basically the only moving part is the automatic transfer switch. Everything else is non-moving. There are cooling fans in the inverter, okay? But again, those are high durability items. But everything else is no moving parts and no maintenance.
Is there, in the city of St. James, we have 5 diesel generators, right, for backup. Are most of the lines for
We have
that?
12.5 maybe, yeah.
And didn't you start those during this winter?
Yeah,
To use the grid?
We run them, yeah, they'll call us, probably, I think last year got called 3 times, where they'll just say, hey, we want you
need you
to
on the
peak
grid?
shave. Yep.
Is there a need in this community for a residential backup generator?
We can carry the
How quick
entire
do you
town.
come online?
So it's a little bit different when I'm running black plant. So black plant means that my transmission line is down. Then I physically have to go out, throw 3 manual overhead line switches, they're called.
Which you did this winter, correct?
Yep.
During the blizzard?
Yep, and then we have to go and isolate our, it's a substation by Brett Curry's house, we call it our west sub. So we have to open up all of our feeders there. And those 3 switches we're throwing, what we're doing is we're tying our loop system. And then there's 2 that we have to throw at the plant. So it's probably, by the time I get somebody there, and it's always an inclement weather, so it probably does take an hour to get them on.
So a home's not gonna get cold?
No, and when I actually peak shave, I can have 12 meg on it. That's about 1 minute 30 seconds. So it's really impressive.
The making machine is gonna hold that hour, even if you're on oxygen in your home.
Yep.
They all have
St. James is
backup
not losing
systems.
power, because you got us covered.
Right.
So within
Yep,
the
and we have a
city-
list of everybody who's on oxygen too. So
And are most of those lines buried?
so all of our I call it residential is buried, but all of our mainline feeder is kept overhead just for the fact that you can see it and we can isolate it and troubleshoot it quickly. So we really do have it down to kind of a science that.
So would a storm take out some area of town because those lines went down?
Yep, it could, but hopefully, it would be a small area because we have enough. Like those 3 switches those are just our normal opens. I've got like 18 of them on our system. So unless you're between that little area where that bad spot is, so it'll be a smaller area if we were to have that type of event.
You only have a small section of your.
Yeah, we're talking blocks,
Yeah.
not like in a quarter of town, so.
So do you need batteries here in St. James or not really?
I think that in my,
If you want an electric car, it's a good idea.
yeah, and as a lineman, I think it's a good idea. I mean,
Time-based,
Time of use.
time of use one, then it would make more sense.
Yeah.
Or net metering is still the best way for us to go in St. James.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. And I think, I mean, the battery thing, being self-sustainable, there's probably something to be said about that. And then the utility really is out of it. You're doing what you want, too. So, and you're not looking at another meter charge or,
What
But I
I,
talk about with the battery too, it's instantaneous, so, it goes so fast that the batteries change over so much faster than, even if you had an automatic generator, that you won't hardly notice anything, so that'll help with your
At the nursing-
convenience of
We had
at home.
generators at the nursing home, and they had, by code, we had 15 seconds that they had to come in. The residential apartments, the nursing home itself had instantaneous.
Well, those batteries are less than a second, aren't they?
yes.
Yeah, they're less than a
That's
second.
crazy.
And that's just your standard battery
Yeah.
setup.
Alternating current is a pulse, right? And so in the transfer switch, you've got the grid lines coming in and flowing. Well, there's sensor in there, and if that thing gets, like 238 volts, automatically the switch clicks over, closes the loop, and now you're on battery then, right? But it's just like Jim said, it's a quarter of a second. It's faster even than that. We have a lot of rural installations, and as you get away from town, the level of independence required
It's more
when
important.
you're out in the country. And that's a matter of pride for a lot of people too. They like the idea that I'm prepared. And so that's some of the reason why, you asked me before, and I don't know if I answered you, but about 70% of our systems
Our
either
battery.
have a battery component or what we would call battery ready, where they have the solar, they have an inverter that will not only turn DC to AC and send it to your house or to the grid, but it will also charge your batteries and also operate your batteries. So it's kind of a 3-in-1. It's an added cost, but it does a lot more to it. There are other programs in pilot right now, and I think Sabri can tell you about the one in Vermont called Virtual Power Plant. So imagine, let's say you had 50 people in St. James and they all had solar and battery systems. And then he sees grid demand spiking up, and you all have signed a contract, said each of us are gonna have 5 extra kilowatt hours in our battery bank, where in high demand times, you can go in there with just simple software and send those electrons out of your batteries to a point of low demand to a point of high demand and avert any need to import power at distance. And that's called, and what they do in that scenario is they do pay you a premium, it's net metering plus, because of the time in which that power is getting drawn. But yeah, talk about your experience in Vermont.
Well, I don't have an experience with it yet, but that's, yeah.
Okay.
System,
So the software in these new inverters allows you to do a lot of different things. We do have utilities that don't want the extra solar generation on their grid. And so we can, what's called export limit. We can keep that extra power from flowing out to the grid if they want. So we always.
Sophisticated as you need to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've been talking or hearing about inverters built into the panels. Is that something that you are seeing, or do you have to have your own inverter?
We don't use those.
Okay.
And a lot of the reason is because we build and design so many different systems. Like a lot of your bigger companies kind of have like 2 or 3 package options, and then they kind of supply themselves and build everything kind of the same way. For us, we're custom. And so every property, every person has a different set of goals. They're at a different utility that has different requirements. They have different ideas of what they want to do with it. And so with a solar panel slash combo inverter, if something were to ever happen to one of the two components, now you basically lost both of them.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And you know, there are certain situations, do you have microinverters?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
And that's like individual panel.
that's right,
inverters, yeah.
yes. Whenever you install on a occupied roof, you have to have rapid shutdown at each panel.
Okay.
And so, depending on what you're doing with the power, that can vary what's underneath that panel. In her situation, it's coming down from the roof, alternating current, grid ready. So it'll go either right into her house or right out onto the grid. It's
Okay.
ready to be eaten, if you will. If I have batteries, or if I have a car charge, and I want to charge my car faster, you do that with DC. And so now what you're doing is you have converters up there that bring it down DC instead of AC. And then depending on what you want to do with it on the ground, then you can either send it into batteries, you can charge a car, or you convert it to AC and send it back out onto the grid. So having that that's the great thing about solar and batteries, you have an enormous amount of flexibility with what you can do with them. And all without any kind of energy inputs, no combustion as the end game on the other end. And so yes, does it take industrial processes to make them on the front end? Of course it does. You can't make this table without an industrial process. But on the back end, you don't have the combustion on the other end.
Right.
Occupied roof.
What's that?
Occupied roof.
Right, a residence, yeah. Something that's
Not animal
occupied.
occupied, not a
Right.
separate garage.
If you put it on a barn
Then
or
you
a,
can do an inverter for the whole field, but
Right.
on an occupied roof of a house, it must have
rapid shutdown.
AC coming down.
No, it must have rapid shutdown at each panel.
Right.
Okay, in other words, if something happens to one of the panels and they are compromised, okay, that panel will shut down exclusive of the rest of the system. So there are bypasses in there. So the rest of the system can keep operating, but that panel is shut down at that point of generation.
Now take that and give it to the other side. An unoccupied roof that doesn't have that has a network of 30 panels up on it. One of them shuts down, they all shut down?
Well,
Or
when you
can
design a system like that, you have to weigh, is there going to be any kind of shade there? If there is not, like a ground mount, the most efficient way is to string them all together in a single string and run them back to one, what you call a string inverter. Now, if there's shade, you still have to manage that panel. Like, a tree, is over here and you get part of the panel shaded, you would still need something under those panels to manage that. Otherwise, you're correct. You would shut down that entire string, or you would derate it to the level of whatever the lowest production of a single panel would be.
The entire system would be to that one panel?
If it's not regulated, yes, if it's all strung together. But again, on a ground mount, or on like a barn mount where there is no shade, you don't have a need for that. Okay?
So if you have shade, you'd have to go again back to,
Getting beyond you now, Sandy?
Pardon?
I said, this is getting beyond you now?
Well, we're way past time.
Yeah, it is.
I
Yeah,
have
you're-
some other calls I need to make.
Your solar panels have multiple bus bars on them that can control a set of cells. And then there are bypass circuits in between them. When you put either a DC optimizer or a microinverter on there, it communicates directly with those buses and will shut down or optimize with bypass if there's shading, if there's something compromised on the panel.
Snow.
Yep, exactly. So,
What about, this might be an odd question, but this is something that I deal with is, what if there's like a fire and the firefighters need to get in there and,
Right.
like I know that when I come there and pull the meter, then the system should shut down when I pull the meter, correct?
right.
But let's say that I'm not there or, maybe you're rural or something, will they know that or how will they?
Yeah, when you design the system, there are, first of all, you have the rapid shutdown mechanisms on the panels themselves. So if there is any kind of short circuit or open circuit, they'll all basically stop.
Okay.
Right? But once you come down to the meter, the service, once you hit the ground, there's a shut off right there. And it cannot be locked, it has to be fully accessible by the utility, by code. So, and the firemen, they would also know about it, because when you put a system like that on, you register it in the utility, it also gets registered with police and fire. Right? So it's a big lever, you hit the thing, bam, it's down. Right? A lot of times too, like with your system, all of your optimizers feed into what's called an AC combiner box. And it's breakered also in there. It has circuit breakers. Right next to it is the shutdown device, then your solar meter. Okay? So yeah, everything has a multitude of safeties on it in that scenario.
Good.
Yeah. Again, lots of lawsuits behind that. So every single time something like that happens, then they
Put it on our check.
add redundancy in there. And so the most current 2020 NEC code has all of those requirements throughout all 50 states.
Quickly, one last thing that people have asked over time is, how much of this is, what's the word I'm looking for? After you're done using it.
Oh, recyclable.
Recyclable, thank you, I
Yes.
lost the
What do
word.
you do with it later? Does it go in the?
That's awesome.
Junk heap
Great.
of solar?
Great question. I'll try and keep it short. Solar panels can be recycled very easily. There's delaminating processes that would take the tempered glass off. You could recycle the glass. It's an aluminum frame that can easily be disassembled and reused again. Okay. At that point, there is some electronics on the back. Very little. There are those bypass diodes. They get pulled off, and then at that point, the silica, the polysilica cells, which are actually quite a low percentage of the weight and substance of the entire panel, they are crushed, ground up, and then through a chemical process, all of the elements are separated back out. Germany has had widespread solar adoption for a long time, so they have a number of panels going offline at scale. So they actually have a supply, okay? They have the recycling process already in place, and there is a market. And what they found is when they reprocess these polysilica cells, they're actually more efficient than when they were first made, okay? But there has to be a financial benefit in a capitalist system. There has to be a market for it, okay? And right now, we don't have enough of a supply. There are 5 startup companies that have proof of concept for recycling panels. None of them are in operation because there's not enough inventory to do anything with
Yeah,
it.
they're lasting long enough, they're not having to
Plus-
recycle yet.
Plus, you also have to be able
40
to,
years from now.
you also have to be able to compete with new panels.
Sure.
In other words, it has to be cost competitive, otherwise people aren't going to buy them. And no bank is going to finance a startup company to sell something that won't sell on the market. So you have to have a market for it, okay? And that's what I will tell you. If you come to our store, we are constantly reusing panels. My partner has old enough customers where he's got panels 10, 12, 15 years old that are still good, they're still full voltage, and they've lost less performance than what the warranty states, and we'll put them on like smaller, either off-grid or smaller application. They're still good. They still work fine. And what we'll do is we'll replace those with more powerful, more efficient panels on the same system, on the same infrastructure. So you can reuse them for a long time, more so than any other power generating source. You know, yeah, you have to rebuild motors and turbines. Okay, so but yes, I'm fully confident if we wanted to, we could fully recycle all of our panels, but we gotta want them.
And need to. Right now, you don't really need to.
When you look at plastic, it costs less for virgin plastic than it does for recycled plastic, and that's why there's so much plastic in the world, and we functionally only recycle about 8% of it. So we ship the rest of it overseas to someone else. Okay? There has to be a market in a capitalist world. There has to be a financial benefit for a business to do that. Otherwise, they're not going to do it, and no bank is going to finance them to do it.
Right.
Even though it's a kumbaya moment, it doesn't pay off.
That's right. Now, in Germany, they have stronger environmental protections. So like the Tesla Giga plant, 90% of their batteries there all have to come from recycled materials, all processed in the Czech Republic. But they've also had EVs on their market a lot longer than we have here too, so they have a supply. The only large-scale battery recycler currently operating in the United States is Redwood Materials, and they get all of the used, crash, salvaged Teslas. Because J.B. Strobel was one of the guys that was with Elon Musk when Tesla was started. So he's the only large-scale battery recycler currently in the United States for the lithium products. There's lots of lead acid recycling going on because they've been around 100+ years. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. There's a lot of good information. And hopefully we can share that, because we didn't have as big a crowd as we want, but we learned enough I think we can share with our neighbors and friends. Boy, I tell you, there are lots of things.
I would throw something else back out to you, Jim,
Yeah.
because really this is under the Climate Smart moniker,
Yep.
Climate Smart Municipalities.
Yep.
And my question would be, there is a direct payment available for nonprofit and government entities. What is the value of some of the government or nonprofit buildings here having solar and reducing grid demand within St. James? If those organizations could get a 30% direct pay back benefit from the government for putting a system in.
Yeah, I'm on the county board, and so consequently, if we as a county wanted to put some on our buildings, we can actually get the 30% back by way of a check.
Yep,
Right.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
Plus-
the same would go for city,
Yes,
public buildings in the city.
Yes, and churches, any nonprofit.
School?
Yes,
Talked about the school before.
yes. So I mean, and this goes back to the grid operator. If you put power generation on some of these buildings, that much less power during peak times that he has to make.
Yeah.
So, there would be times
We have
where
a
it's,
system where it's level 3, so EEA 3. When they would call for that, that's when we would reach out to the hospital or the nursing home that have generation that they would start. We've never seen it. It's never gotten to that level yet, like we're just not in that territory to have like more blackouts.
Right.
But if it were to, I mean, we are set up to where we would call, we have a call list right now that we would call the customers and tell them, hey, can you do what you can? And if we had a decent sized solar, we would put them on that list.
Sure.
And they'd be reimbursed. All the other companies are too.
Yes.
Well, I know when we did the big system I told Sabri about in Hutchinson, the city and the grid operator there were happy for, that business owner to cover those businesses with solar. That was, again, that much less grid demand during the middle part of the day because they were making their own power. He was still managing everything within the city. You still need him.
Yeah.
It's not like we're trying to threaten the grid in any way. We're really working with the grid.
We've got a,
It's nice to lighten the load in some ways, especially like when the EVs do hit the market and we have that
That's
kind of
right.
charge.
That's the big unknown. The question's gonna be how fast is the adoption? And if it gets, really going, and it seems to be expanding, fairly exponentially, now all of a sudden, there's a lot of people gonna be asking for more watts from you.
Yeah, we can't, upgrade our system that quickly.
Yeah, so when we ask about payback, we're asking about a static system running in a linear phase. We're not in static times. We're in very dynamic times, very disrupted times.
maybe Jim and Matt can answer this. We've got the landfill out east of town, and can't be used. And one of our commissioners, Bill Miller, was here, and Bill says, can we put solar on that and have that solar usage for our county operations? And I don't know if there's any
You got
regulation.
two different utilities, so we serve
Yeah.
the landfill,
Yeah,
and they serve the county buildings.
yeah.
So in that case, that doesn't work very well.
It doesn't.
You need to be under the same utility to sort of make something,
Make that work,
so-
okay. Well, that
You
answers that.
couldn't talk together and make something where
still
it could become a
under-
model for the rest of the nation?
Just figuring out who's buying.
Sell the land.
Innovation.
We'd have to just sell.
Yeah, it's gets a little bit tricky when
Yeah.
when you're talking, two separate utilities.
Okay.
There's a thing called wheeling, but
Yeah.
then you just put an added cost onto it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, at that point in time, it doesn't make sense.
Sure.
I was gonna say
Your
one,
business card, Jerry?
one quick note is that, if you put a solar array on your house, once you have that set up, you can easily add more panels, like, we have our south-facing roof with panels, but like, if we got an EV someday, we could add some on our west roof, it's already there, you just add more panels, so like,
Sure.
you can also expand with less cost the second time around.
Did it do anything to your homeowner's insurance?
Great question. I wish more people were here for that one.
Yeah.
Insurance companies do not view solar as an added risk.
They don't, good.
No. So you're not put in a different risk class.
Okay.
What you do is you register your system as a property value add for catastrophic loss. And then they just add the value of that system.
System.
And for me, on my house, I have a small house, it costs me like $12 more a year on my homeowner's insurance. So it's not a huge increase.
Is that something that, as the installer, do you, am I as a homeowner supposed to be contacting my insurance
Yes.
with a form about that?
Yes. Yeah, you definitely want to contact your
We
agent.
can leave the tables
Um,
as is.
I will, as the installer, well, first of all, I don't have the relationship with the insurance company.
Right, yeah.
But what I will do, when we install everything, we'll send all the warranty information via email. And then also tell them to send us any correspondence that they get from their insurance agent, and then we can validate the system, that way they know.
It's possible I did that and forgot, but I also gave you that.
Yeah, you definitely want to check. That was the other thing, if you ever do have a hail claim, and your solar is on your homeowner's insurance, there is a line item that will pay for the removal and then the return.
Yeah.
We do a lot of that, we just got done with a couple of them.
Ralph was here, Ralph.
Yeah, we weren't the installer yet, so.